Hello to everybody. My name is Sonia Shifa. If you are watching this video instead of myself giving an online presentation, it is because I am probably in labor or have delivered my baby very recently. So even if I cannot be synchronically present at this roundtable today, I am grateful for the opportunity of presenting to you my PhD research project. So just a few words about myself. Currently I am based in Berlin, where I started my doctoral studies in January 2020 at the Humboldt-Universität. I am a member of a graduate school called Inklusion Bildungsschule, so Inclusion Education School. My research is being conducted in German language, and my topic is the shaping of inclusion in times of digital education, focusing on teachers' experience in Berlin schools. I decided on this research topic around the beginning of 2018, when the COVID pandemic was not in sight, and still the emergency nature of this pandemic-related measures barged into everyday school life in form of a crisis. And everything crisis, everything new, presents the chance to look at the old, the established, the normal. So this is what I intend to do. And in this presentation, I want to talk you through the main features of my project and offer you a look into my research process. So, even if studies and public opinion have long been stating the delay Germany was showing in the shift to update their school system in terms of digitalization, it has long been on top of the agenda, and it was even implemented in form of a long-expected policy called Digitalpakt Schule. On top of this, the pandemic and the related measures of shifting schooling to remote and the online sphere brought increased relevance to the research topic in question. Inclusion has equally played an important role on the agenda, and now more and more digitalization and inclusion are addressed together. A lot of expectations are being put on these concepts, sometimes without even explaining what is actually meant by them. And of course, the responsibility is put on teachers to put digitalization and inclusion into action, ultimately for achieving a better, more equal education for all. So I ask myself, what do teachers make of this? What does this mean to their profession? Available research that addresses digitalization and inclusion, here I have to say my exploration focused not exclusively but mainly on German-speaking research, they address certain aspects again and again. To put it in a very condensated way, I found studies focus mainly on A, best practice examples, B, the stating of available, missing or necessary competencies, and C, learning outcomes. The findings available are definitely relevant and important, but yet there is an overrepresentation of a focus on learning. Gerd Biesta has already referred to a tendency to learnification of educational discourse, which brings along the consequence of relaying the teacher to a position of learning coach and missing the chance to ask important questions regarding the actual role of the teaching profession. So, if in research around digital education, the focus is mainly set on digital tools and their effect on learning and learning outcomes, where does this leave teaching? Plus, they then focus on what works on a descriptive kind of level and fail to ask the big questions related to power structures, the role of school on increasing or decreasing inequalities, the structural characteristics of the teaching profession, which lie behind the possibility of school as we know to change or to remain unchanged. I list these questions as to show the potential of questions that go beyond the descriptive level and state the urge of questioning structures and power relations while doing so. For this, I chose to put teachers, or rather the teaching profession, at the center of my research project. My research question is, how do teachers shape inclusion in times of digital education? Or formulated more specifically, what experiences with the shaping of inclusion in the context of digitalization have teachers in Berlin schools made? Professions can be theoretically addressed through different theoretical approaches. I choose the praxeological sociology of knowledge as a theoretical foundation. Ralf Bunsack, a professor based in Berlin, developed a research program for social science called Documentary Method, It's based mainly on the foundations laid by Karl Mannheim's ideas on sociology of knowledge, and he then went on to make it fruitful for profession theory. I will now try to give you a super brief overview on the key features of this methodological framework and hopefully clarify the aim of my project. To name the core aspects of this theoretical and methodological framework, we have to differentiate between two types or levels of knowledge, so Wissen in German. The communicative knowledge, which is explicit and available, and the conjunctive knowledge, which is implicit and not available on a communicative way. It's a type of knowledge of which you cannot say that you know it. A good example for these two types of knowledge is the concept of family. We all know things about family. There are things we can explain about our family, and then there are implicit knowledge around family roles and status of family in society, which we don't know we know. Now, both these types of knowledge are shared. Once it's in my own family, and then on a broader level with, for example, my generation or my cultural milieu. So this is why the concept of conjunctive space of experience is the following key aspect of this theoretical framework. We share knowledge with other people without necessarily knowing them personally. These types of knowledge, as I said, are not consciously accessible to subjects in question. It is through a scientific approach that it is possible for the social scientists to reconstruct it. What we then actually reconstruct is the so-called framework of orientation, in which certain meanings or topics are processed. Good. What does all this mean in terms of my research project? With this theoretical foundation as background, I conducted semi-structured interviews with 14 teachers that are currently employed at integrated secondary schools in Berlin. I conducted an open form of interview where I had a few questions prepared, or better, a number of topics I wanted addressed, but mainly trying to encourage them to narrate experiences. The transcribed interviews are then to be analyzed through the documentary method, which offers a way of separating the two levels of knowledge I explained earlier by the means of two separate steps of interpretation, the formulating interpretation and the reflective interpretation. Status quo is 14 interviews have been conducted and transcribed, and the interpretation steps still lay ahead of me. I'll tell you a bit about my sample. About a year ago, I contacted all 144 integrated secondary schools in Berlin via email. I chose this school format specifically. This is a special and rather new format of secondary school in Berlin. It was created as a means of responding to this somewhat in terms of equality, problematic German system of differentiating upper and lower levels of school leaving certificates. They are heavily based on accomplishments attained in the primary level. So at this type of school, students get the possibility to attaining the different certificates, less attached to their accomplishments on prior levels. So this school format then has a prerogative towards inclusion from its very design. It is expected that teachers then have some sort of experience regarding inclusion in terms of teaching for all and adapting to the needs of the students rather than expecting students to adapt to the expectations of the school. At this point, it might be important to clarify that I refer to this broad understanding of the term inclusion, not strictly related to disability issues or special needs education, as it is often associated, but all sorts of heterogeneity and the statement just of a school for all. Similarly, I could expect that every teacher had some sort of experience with digitalization, again meaning the broad use of digital tools in the classroom, even before the pandemic. I did not set further criteria for the selection of my interview partners. I ended up scheduling online interviews with 14 teachers belonging to 7 schools located in 7 different districts in Berlin. Their work experience went from 1 to 40 years and all subjects were covered. They all responded to my email invitation spontaneously and of their own initiative. As I said, I used an open form of interview. I always began by asking them something along the lines of, tell me about the experiences you had with the use of digital technology in the classroom. Feel free to start at any given point of your memories and share just anything that comes to your mind. So you can see that this question gives room to different and unconditioned answers. You can see in the following sample extracts that associations were wide. I will read some examples of these immediate responses to my post questions. Well, I think that is, of course, a positive effect of the pandemic, where all of this got reinforced. Another one, well, I already had a website before Corona. I had it for how long? 5 years or so. Another one, yeah, well, actually very good ones, yes, but it varies from school to school, well, how the technical equipment is. Another one, actually from my own classes, I only know media in the form of movies before the holidays. Or another one, we have normal, well, smart boards. Or yet another one, okay, then I go way back, about 20 years. I put it this way. That's when I got out of my teacher training and went to the school and wrote my examination thesis on the topic computer use for pupils with learning disabilities. So this is just to show you that associations go from their own school experience as a students, others at their teacher training, others associated it with pandemic-related experiences. Many started directly talking about specific tools or softwares. I then went on to ask them about experiences with digital technology enhancing or disabling participation, asking about specific students or groups of students who benefit or are at disadvantage through digital enhanced teaching, also about their experiences combining digitalization and inclusion and the receptivity they perceived among students and colleagues, so as to give a broad overview. I always encourage them to talk about their actual experiences, to tell me specific situations and tell me stories about their students rather than give me opinions. Now, as I said, the next step would be the analysis of the transcribed interviews. Apart from the 2 steps of interpretation, comparative analysis also plays an important role. So I look for topics that are dealt with in different interviews and reconstruct the frame of orientation in which the meanings and performances are processed. I will then be able to construct types, which will tell us something about the habitus, the orientations teachers in general have towards inclusion, which emerge especially clear at this moment due to the crisis erupted by digitalization of schooling. As I said, I am not yet in conditions to present findings, not even preliminary ones, but I will nonetheless give you an exemplary sneak peek into my material. So, for example, when I asked about experiences combining digitalization and inclusion, again, associations are wide and we can see at the first glance many different ways of addressing the issue. I picked 3 examples to show you. So, one teacher says, I have a student with special needs status, for example, in my class. She has profited a lot of this pandemic. Yeah, she is. So she was one of the few who was allowed to come to school 4 times a week. She always worked with the computer. Yeah, she is now, however, stuck back again, right? Well, because now she has to work again the same way as all the others. So an association directly with the pandemic, and funny even how the profit point is made by basically the absence of all the other students. Another teacher tells me to the same question. So in every class we have 1 or 2 students who have special needs in terms of learning, and we have an overall a relatively low performing student body. And digital media does offer the possibility to provide additional practice opportunities, so to speak, or to provide them with opportunities for repetition and the revision of context. To what extent they may make use of it, well, that depends on the students themselves. So here, maybe we see a more classical association that one could expect for this topic regarding these typical additional opportunities for students who apparently need them. We also encounter answers of the sort of, one is glad that, and so many of the other teachers also, if one now somehow manages to do anything at all, and then such subtleties as inclusion, no one is thinking about that at the moment. So we can see in what different ways teachers deal with the same topics. These are passages that I am likely to take and interpret in detail. According to the documentary method, I will not only look at what they say at the thematic field, but also at how they talk about it, which metaphors they use, when and how they pause, to try to reconstruct the framework in which these topics are processed. So at the end, I will have nothing to say about positive or negative learning outcomes, nothing about the competences teachers have or don't have. I will hopefully have a series of orientation frameworks in which teachers deal with these issues. Digital education is a public policy. but one that is strongly affected by the current context, by external factors, by necessity, and even also by some sort of emergency. So this means that teachers are very much left to their own devices when it comes to the implementation, left to their own actions and decisions, without instructions, without precedents, without preparation. So taking the opportunity to ask teachers about their experiences with digitalization and inclusion has, I believe, an enormous potential to contribute to professional research and to shed light on the reshaping of the teaching profession. I want this to be accompanied, also fostered by the chosen theoretical and methodological framework, by an appreciation for the professionalized practice of teachers. Because if the premises of both inclusion and digitalization rely so heavily on teachers' practice in their enactment, then I believe it is essential to give much more space to their voice and to do so in a way that represents and respects that voice and their implicit knowledge. So I am aware that my presentation poses more questions than answers at this point, but I still hope it will make some sort of contribution to the discussion. Sadly, I will miss the chance to hear your questions, comments, and feedback, but you are welcome to contact me if you wish, and maybe we will cross paths again on some other occasion. So thank you very much for listening.